Well, Gil, if I'm not mistaken, you first started out working in racing at the fairgrounds there in Nashville, didn't you?
I did.
All right.
Right around probably 1982.
Okay. Now, what were you doing?
Well, actually, I had a motorcycle shop part-time.
Okay.
After getting out of school, and I had a friend that was dirt racing, Don Jenkins, who was with a local company, their Athens paper, was dirt racing, needed some help one weekend, and I said, I don't really care about going doing that. He's like, come on, I need some help. So I went with him, and man, I've been stuck on it ever since.
Now, how did you get hooked up with Filmar?
Through the fairgrounds, because of the fact after Don quit racing, we another guy from Nashville, Andy Dunlap, and I started building late models, and David Shacklett drove the car. Well, he drove it for 1 year, and he had a wreck, broke his neck. We had to put somebody in the car, and Bobby Hamilton was running for the championship that year in '87, and he needed a ride, so it kind of worked out. So he came to us because our cars were always fast, and so he came to us, and we jumped in, won the championship there for about 3 years in a row, and then Filbert, that was with Filmar Racing, he was sponsoring a Ford team there at that time. Well, I guess he was tired of us beating him, so he actually bought our late model team from us, and we started Filmar Racing in the late 1989.
Wow. Now, I went back on your Facebook page and was looking at some of your photos, and you and Bobby go back a long way.
We do.
Tell me about Bobby Hamilton.
I mean, Bobby was a different kind of guy. I mean, if there was ever a blue-collar racer, it was Bobby. I mean, he drove a wrecker all day long, and then at night, you know, we'd work on the cars, and we eventually moved all the cars to my house. I built a shop there and everything, so he would come over in the daytime. We had guys working on it, but he would always bring us something to eat. Had his dog he brought with him, Elwood, who was a German Shepherd. He was a real piece of work, but but Bobby was just he was just a good all-around guy, and everybody got along well.
Now, you started off late model racing with Bobby, and then Filbert came in, he bought the team. At what point did you start thinking about going Busch racing? Was that just the natural progression?
I think it was just a natural progression because Darrell had come to the racetrack. Obviously, he'd come in on different weekends, and he actually drove one of our late models one weekend. And we ran really well with him that weekend. I think we sat on the pole. We should have won the race. There was some controversy about Bill Elliott driving the Ford car that night, and Darrell kind of let him, Bill passed him in the late stages on Two Rivers Ford night. Yeah. We'll leave it at that.
Controversy at Nashville?
Exactly. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But no, it was a natural progression because when he would come to town, Bobby would drive his car for him. When Darrell was going to come in for a Busch event, Bobby would set the cars up for him and everything, so they became great friends. And then as that went on, it was just time for us to go Busch racing. So we went, bought an old Nova from Darrell, came over to Charlotte and picked it up. It's one of the old body styles from Eddie Jones, and we went from there.
Now, you mentioned the fact that you had a motorcycle shop. Is that what you were doing full time, or what were you racing full time?
No, I had a motorcycle shop in the evening because we just decided, a friend of mine that I went to school with decided that you couldn't buy motorcycle parts or to get them worked on after you got off work. So we opened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 9 at night. I actually worked at a video store, worked on video games and pinball machines.
Really?
When I got out of school, that's what I was doing in the daytime. We'd work on motorcycles at night, and it just we did that for 3 or 4 years and loved it a lot. But racing kind of took over.
Now, were you looking to get into racing, or did you just kind of follow along as the team, the late model team with Bobby, kind of progressed up the ladder?
You know, I really wasn't looking to get into racing, but it just kept morphing into something different all the time. And somehow, I don't know, I ended up being the lead dog all the time at orchestrating how things were getting done, or during the week where we were going to get things and how we were going to get things done. Because being in Nashville, trying to get parts, pieces, and technology from the Carolinas was always tough. So I was always tasked with tracking some of that stuff down. Luckily, I had a tremendous mentor in Nashville, Mike Alexander, that, I mean, I'll never be able to repay him everything he taught me about racing that people that today don't even have to go through. But he taught me so many things about racing, and it also taught me about just what it took to not just to race, but to race up front.
Yeah. So Filmar started out with Bobby its first 3 seasons, 88, 89, 90. Then came David Green in 91, Jeff Burton in 92 and 93, and then Kenny Wallace beginning in 94. How difficult was it to transition from one driver to another during all those seasons?
It wasn't too bad because the seat situation is nowhere as complex as it is now. So we were able to go through that transition pretty easily. The biggest thing was just trying to transition, obviously, into sponsorship, into logistics. Again, being from Nashville and racing every single week, whether it was in Orange County or Oxford, Maine, that took up 2 days of our week automatically just in travel. So logistically, it was tough, but we had a very strong team. But when we left, our shop left.
Yeah.
There was nobody left at home. So we came back, and we did. Well, everybody did back then. But you got out on the road, and back then it didn't matter where you were racing. If you had an issue, all the teams pitched in to help with either parts, pieces, or even labor. I mean, I remember the Houstons helped us tremendously through some of those transitions at the track. Bob Labonte, as gruff and as mad as he would get and everything else, if you ever need something, you could go to him, you could get stuff.
Yeah.
And it was more like a traveling family between all the teams back then, so that made it easier.
Personality-wise, how would you compare those 4 drivers? Because to me, it would almost seem like if you had sat down and said, okay, we got 4 drivers, and we're going to get 4 completely different personalities.
Exactly.
You couldn't have done a better job of getting different personalities.
Well, the way that the flow went on that actually worked out pretty good because David Green was just meek, mild.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you go out to dinner with him and he'd order a salad without lettuce. I mean, that was one of the big things with him. But he was just very, very quiet. So then we went into Jeff Burton, and he was more structured a little bit probably,
Yeah.
but his personality he wasn't as calm as David,
Yeah.
but he was nowhere near as wide open as Kenny. So the progression worked out pretty good right there. It was kind of like putting your toe in a swimming pool
Baby step.
and jumping on in, because when we got to Kenny, obviously the whole personality aspect picked up.
Yeah. All right, so I have to ask, I broke into the sport 91, 92, and I was at New River Valley in 92 when you guys got hit with the illegal rear end or whatever.
Right.
What happened?
Well, if you read the rule book back then, the rule book stated that you had to have a Detroit locker type rear end.
Okay.
It didn't say mandatory, it said type.
Yeah.
So it had to meet a few qualifications. So with that being said, back then a true track or a gold track was just getting into the sport a lot. And so we instituted one, we ran it. We actually had run it a couple other weeks, and it wasn't like it was night and day made the car that much better. It just, that was just a good track for us all around. And we ran really well that night. So we had to go through a bunch of stuff about getting the car taken care of, had to take the rear end out of it, send it to Larry Pollard. We didn't know nothing until the next day. But the one thing that did happen, Robert Black rewrote the rule book that it said Detroit locker rear end only. It didn't say type.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of people talk about cheating and reading between the rules. You got to read how it's written. And when you do that, you can. There's workarounds for most everything.
How did you wind up as the crew chief? At what point did you take over as crew chief?
Really from the get-go, I guess, because the late model team was my late model team that we raced at Nashville. So somebody had to take that position, I guess, back then. It wasn't like the crew chief is now, or I became later on in racing. That was just more, I had to go to the meetings at the racetrack, and somebody had to be there to answer the questions. But we had 5 or 6 guys that were all fairly capable of doing that, and that bonded well together. And it just was I guess it just became a natural progression for me because I was able to had the gift of gab, I guess.
Yeah.
We could talk to the NASCAR officials when I needed to, and smooth them over when I needed to, and argue when I needed to.
You eventually became a very successful crew chief, won a lot of races. But in those early days, what was your learning curve like to get to that point where you were ready to go cup racing full time and win races on a regular basis?
It was a tremendous learning curve because the first cup race we ran was at Loudon, New Hampshire with Jeff Burton actually. And that car we were already on an engine deal in the Busch series with Roush. So Phil Burton, with his relationship with them, since we were purchasing our engines from them, we were able to get a car that was basically race ready. And Chris Hussey, who posts a bunch of pictures all the time, I posted a picture of that car not that long ago, and he remembered. It was JR22 was the car number, and they gave it to us race ready. We got that car in the shop, and it was like getting the best gift you could ever get. Somebody handed us a top-notch Winston Cup car. It was in our shop. Nobody was around. We weren't sneaking peeks of it, so we jacked it up, looked at every inch of it, took it apart, scaled it, and tried to get as much knowledge as we possibly could from one of the top-tier teams. Went to Loudon, finished, qualified fourth, ended up getting wrecked on like the second lap. Yeah. Our own fault, though. We spotter cleared him low, and we wrecked early in the race, so that part was disappointing. But as far as the transition into cup racing to where we got, as we went cup racing with Square D at Filmar, we had a lot of good runs, but we also had a tremendous amount of disappointments. Yeah. Of back then when you had second round qualifying, you'd sit on the back of the truck with Elmo Langley and say, should we should we qualify again today? Should we stand on our time? What's the weather going to be like? What's our tires going to be like? Yeah. He was a tremendous asset to everybody that was on the bubble of getting in a race. But we had to go home several times, and there is nothing more deflating or anything else than to go to the racetrack, do all that preparation, and have to go home. But looking back, that was some of the best things that ever happened to us because we could go back, and everybody goes back and debriefs now. Back then, we'd go home, be aggravated, just evaluate what happened. What do we need to do to get better? What did we miss it on? And I think that we got better with that. We actually had some good runs with Filmar, some opportunities to win. We sat on our first pole at Martinsville. And I remember Ray Everham came over to me in the driver's meeting and said, man, you guys were flying in practice. You stepped our game up. And I think Jeff ended up winning that race. We ran third or fourth or something. But the effort that it took to get there, looking back, you didn't think that it was that much different of an effort, but it really was. Yeah. Because there's so many things that you had to do wrong to figure out what to do right.
Wow. That's
the biggest thing that I think I saw on the learning curve is you do 100 things during the course of the week, and every one of them fail. But one of them works, and that sticks with you. But the biggest thing that you have to be able to do is Monday morning, you have to be able to flush it. You got to be able to forget it. Yeah. All that stuff that you were positive that was going to work through the week, on Monday morning, if it didn't work, you had to forget about it and leave your feelings at the door. If it was your idea and the greatest idea in the world and it was a terrible idea, it just was that. You had to go and be able to go again. Yeah. And that's what I think was the biggest transition for me. And I really think that was one of the biggest things that Harvick helped me with, was the fact of he was such a perfectionist and he was so confident in his ability that when the people around him didn't get up to where he thought they needed to be, or they weren't taking as seriously as him, he was extremely hard on people. I mean, now Rodney and those guys at Stewart Haas, they're not getting the real Harvick. They're getting the much more calm and mellower Harvick.
Kinder, gentler.
Oh, I'm just telling you. But I take that. I mean, that's a positive for him and for us because a lot of people. That's why I think we had to switch so many teams at RCR, just because of the fact of a lot of people couldn't handle that pressure. And I think I was on and off Harvick's crew chief 3 times, but it was good for us in each time because he learned something different from somebody else he was working with, and so did I, whether it was Robbie or Skinner or Clint or whatever. And when we'd get back together each time, all the stuff that we had learned or forgot about or missed, quite frankly, would become a positive. And so the progression in that got much better each time until the only time that I really hated the new playoff system, I guess it was 2010 or whatever. If it had been the old system, we'd have won the championship by like 300 points. Yeah. Because when we re-racked the points at Martinsville or wherever it was, we had almost a 400-point lead. Yeah. And that's probably one of the most devastating weekends of my life, going in with that kind of lead and coming out equal.
Yeah.
I did. That wasn't a very happy moment for me, but I look back at it and know that that's just how the rules were then. So you had to play by what they were.
Was there a specific moment when you felt like, as a crew chief, all right, I've got this. I think I know what I'm doing. Was there a specific moment where you felt like that?
I think probably.
Or did you ever feel like it?
No. Well, I never really felt like I got it.
Yeah.
To 100% because it was evolving all the time, whether we were going into the car tomorrow in 2007 or whatever the stuff that was going on. But I felt more comfortable with my peers.
Yeah.
Because going into the garage, and it's intimidating for anybody. When you go into the garage and you see Richard Petty or Dale Earnhardt, or you see all these guys that you're there with, you see those drivers, they're intimidating. But from my point of view, you go into the garage and you see Dale Inman and you see Jake Elder, whoever that you saw back in the older days, knowing the things that they had done to pioneer the sport, I had to stand back a lot of times because I would look at them as guys that I really looked up to and almost didn't think I needed to be there with them.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I'm really, really proud of that worked good for us at Filmar, is that we actually got to hire Jake Elder for his last job.
Oh, wow.
And he came into the shop and did some suspension and different things, but what he did was he taught a lot of our guys in the shop I don't want to call them the old ways, but I'm going to call them the right ways, because none of it was analytical. Because with Jake, wasn't very good at reading or writing or anything else. The guys played tricks on him all the time, moving his tools around in the toolbox because he would looking for what they were. But he would stay on those guys, get on them when they needed it. He would never just flat pat you on the back and tell you good job, but in his own way, he would let you know what you were doing. And that's what I really, really enjoyed, that aspect of it. But when I felt like I could walk into the garage and talk to these guys on the same level with them, I felt comfortable. But I never did really feel like I know what I'm doing today.
Going back to 1994, we talked about Kenny Wallace coming on board, and you did win 3 races that year. Everything looked good. The following year, 1995, you run Winston Cup and the Busch Series, and it was pretty tough. And you talked about this. It was pretty tough on the Cup side with a bunch of DNQs. How difficult was that for you to handle?
It was extremely difficult because when we had the Red Dog sponsorship coming in, we would take the Busch car. We'd just come out of a season where we ran, I don't know how many laps we led that year, but we had a lot of DNFs from engine failures. And so we were having a lot of success. We were running the Red Dog car on Saturday, won races with it. Then Sunday, have to load the car up in the truck and go home and not to get to be in the race. And it was devastating because you were like, we can get it done on Saturday, but we're not getting it done on Sunday. So it was like, what are we doing wrong here? We shouldn't be making this transition because we weren't ready for it. But at the same token, even though we had to close that company and we did everything else, all those guys that were on that team, if right now there's several of them still scattered through the Cup garage, and they went on to be extremely successful, that were very talented guys. We had a lot of talented guys there that populated the garage, and we all kind of went to college at the same time. Yeah. And it's extremely unfortunate, the fact that we couldn't have done that learning process somewhere else and put that group of guys together later. Yeah. Because the talent we had was it was as good as anybody's.
Was there a sense that maybe you had bitten off more than you could chew going Cup racing?
Oh, shoot, every day. Okay. I mean, just because the fact that we still tried to do it a little bit from Nashville, and then we had to go through the fact of we moved from Nashville to Concord, North Carolina, and then tried to go through that move, set up a shop, get involved with the people over here, the vendors, everybody trying to find a house, everybody going through just a different life change, trying to do that. And we had a couple of guys that actually moved back home because it was a big undertaking for everybody. Yeah. Because we were having a ton of success from Nashville, whether it was at the fairgrounds or Busch racing, we were always a threat to run up front or win some races or do whatever else. and then you get over there and you go a 7-day a week, 16 hours a day, never seeing your family, and your wives are having to take care of everything, and you don't know nothing that's going on. It was tough.
Yeah.
And it was a wake-up call for a lot of people. Like, do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
And you had to make that decision. I mean, it was a life-changing decision.
Now, didn't you text me that you became a co-owner?
I did.
In Filmar?
Well, because I was on the fence. I mean, I was born and raised in Nashville. I had a lot of success at the fairgrounds. Was doing some other racing with, whether it was Mike Alexander or a guy named Gray Bickley that was there. We were running All-American Challenge, and still won a championship with another guy in late models, Nicky Famosa at Nashville. So we were having a lot of success. My parents were there. My mother had just passed away not that far, not too many years before that. My dad was there, so I was like, I don't really want to move. I don't want to go. And so I had to stay on the fence. So in order to convince me to go, Filbert gave me part ownership in the company to go. Wow. And so I went, still reluctantly I went. I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
It was just, but I needed a nudge, and that was the nudge I needed.
How did you wind up leaving the team?
Well, we started struggling, and things just weren't going where it needed to go, and I was looking at other teams and thinking, man, there's other opportunities out here. I'm just not growing like I need to here. So that's what I ended up doing. I mean, I left. I went to Bill Davis, which was a extremely good opportunity for me, because how it worked out. He was going to start a Busch team again. And because Amoco had come to him about a sponsorship, they had Dave Blaney coming in, and he called me up about coming to talk to him and building a Busch team, and we did that, and I guess we raced it for a year or two, and then we went cup racing with that. And again, that was a big learning curve, because that was before the trend of all these dirt guys coming in and everybody knowing how to harness them, and probably. In a lot of ways, I did Dave a lot of good, and maybe I did him a disservice too, because a lot of times I gave him what he wanted, and he wanted to be loose and fast like he was in his dirt cars. And we qualified on a lot of poles. Brent led a lot of laps, ran up front, but we also crashed a lot because we stayed on the edge a lot. And probably I should have been better at dialing the car back. That was a big part of my learning curve too, of a difference between practice qualifying and racing. A lot of people could be fast.
Yeah.
Jeff Gordon kind of went through it in the beginning when he crashed so many times, and they had to dial him back to get to the point from being fast and being just competitive.
After being with Filmar literally from day one, before day one,
right?
How hard was it for you to not be there anymore?
Oh, it was extremely hard. Just because the fact of it was like sending a kid off to college. I mean, it was an organization. I still knew all the guys, and still was extremely happy with them. They actually sat on a pole at Bristol after I left on a short track car, a new one that we had built. We were very proud of that thing, and went to Bristol, sat on the pole, and that was a big deal. Even though I wasn't there, it was a big deal for me, because I knew what that meant. But still, with that company, we were in a position to where Square D was our major sponsor, but it wasn't major dollars.
Yeah.
So we weren't going to be able to push that envelope, because the fact it was just too expensive.
Yeah.
Most of our sponsorship money went to engines. I mean, whether we were Roush and we went to Robert Yates for a little while, most of that money that you would get at that point went to the engine program. So it left very little money for just building the team, building product in the team, hiring people, paying them what they needed to be paid. And as our people got better, people were stealing them just because of the fact that they could pay them more.
Yeah.
And back then, everybody heard it. You'd roll your toolbox down the street for $25 because the sport was so competitive back then that everybody was looking for guys that were already trained, that knew the disciplines, that knew the routine. And so we were getting robbed in that way.
Yeah.
So that was basically the downfall, because we just didn't have the capital just to keep going. It was just too hard.
Now, you talking about that was Filmar?
That was Filmar,
okay,
yeah.
All right. There isn't anything for you on Racing Reference in '98. Were you still working in NASCAR, or were you doing something outside?
No,
of the sport?
I was still in NASCAR, but Richard Jackson. I helped them some. I went back and was doing, excuse me, some late model racing.
Okay.
And just doing some different things like that, just trying to figure out what I was going to do. And that's about the time Bill Davis called me.
Okay.
And that's when that got going. So it was just kind of a, where am I going to go from here? What am I going to do?
Yeah. You worked with Bill Davis and Dave Blaney in 99 and 2000. You talked about that. Then you wound up at RCR, Richard Childress Racing, in 2001. How did that transition take place?
That's a pretty funny story, actually, because of the fact of when we went cup racing with Dave at Bill's, we weren't having the success we needed. We had several crashes and everything else. Had a big sponsor with Amoco and BP, and they were wanting to do something different, so it was just time that Dave needed a change too, and maybe I wasn't giving him what he needed at the point, and so Bill wanted to try something different, so we parted ways. We went on, and so we had a motorhome at that time that Chuck Spicer had fixed me up with.
Chuck Spicer.
And so we had that, and so we were like, I don't know what we're going to do. I'm not going to talk to nobody for a little while. I'm just going to clear my head. I don't want to even talk about racing. So Rhonda and Ford and I jumped in that thing. We headed to Myrtle Beach.
Did you?
And we're at Myrtle Beach down there, and we're trying to decide what we're going to do. And I think we'd pulled up to a grocery store or something. And Rhonda had gone in to get us something. I was sitting out in the motorhome. It was just a little Winnebago. It wasn't nothing special.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there, and I was in the back doing something. Ford was sitting up front because he always thought he had to sit in the front seat to know where we were going. My phone started ringing, and I was like, he looked at it and he said, I don't know this number. And I said, don't answer it. Hello. He answers it. So it was Bobby Hutchins.
Okay.
And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm in Myrtle Beach, taking some time off. He said, well, I'm in Myrtle Beach too. He said, won't you meet me and we'll go have some ice cream or something. And we were going to try to get hooked up, but it never happened there. So we talked, and he said, come and see me when you get back. So I got back. They were busy, and it was
now,
a couple.
When was this?
That was
Off season?
It was at the beginning of the season, or it might have been in August.
Okay. Of
2000.
Okay.
It was late in the year.
Okay.
And it was late in the year. And then so when I got back home, they were busy. He called me and said, come on up and come see us. And he said, let me tell you what we've got going. So they were trying to do something different with Mike Dillon because they just started the 2 and the 21, trying to put the shops together. And I think that was the beginning of the Busch side.
Yeah.
Of a new concept of 2 teams working in the same spot. Same group of guys intermingling with each other instead of being 2 separate entities. And he wanted a crew chief for Mike Dillon. And I'm like, heck yeah, man. Come to RCR, I'm in. I mean, it was like, I thought I had the keys to the castle at that point because when I was at Nashville, you'd look back and you'd see Earnhardt and you'd see these things in Winston Cup scene. You'd see them on whatever of being at the wind tunnel and knowing all this stuff. I'm like, I'm going to get to learn it all now.
Yeah.
I soon learned quickly that the keys to the castle got in and out of the car every week up there. But not to take anything away because very talented. I enjoyed being there. But the team worked so well together. With Todd Barrier was doing Harvick with a 2-car, and I was doing with Mike. Mike had several bad crashes that year before I ever got there. And we had a couple of good runs, but he had one more bad crash. We had a flat, I think, at Bristol, and hit really hard, knocked the battery out of the car.
Wow.
And just too many concussions. Yeah. And so he stepped out of the car, which is devastating for all of us because Mike is a driver, going back talking about personalities. I mean, that guy would be there on Monday morning, walk through, take everybody to lunch. I mean, was right on top of it, working with everybody in the shop. And it was devastating for everybody that he had to get out of the car.
Now, was that the end of 2000?
That would have been at the end of 2000. Yeah, I think so.
Night race. Okay.
Yes, I think it was.
Okay.
You're testing my memory too much for me now.
Yeah. So you were at RCR the whole entire year in 2001, correct?
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it, but whenever anybody thinks of RCR in the year 2001,
right?
I mean, there's only one thing that really comes to mind, and of course that's Dale. Is there any way to put into words what the atmosphere was like within the organization
It was tough. I say because of the simple reason of we were going through a huge transition. We'd had so much success with that Busch team, and AOL was coming in. Harvick, we had him geared up, cars ready to go. We were going to go Cup race, and Harvick was going to go and jump in that car, and everything was going to be ready. And then all of a sudden we go to Daytona, and the accident happens. Then it's just everybody just kind of fell apart because everybody didn't know what to do. Everybody's kind of graduated back to the shop and was just standing around, just looking at each other. And Richard had a meeting in the old 3 shop and got everybody together. When I say everybody, we didn't have that many people back then. Like we got up to 400 and something people, but let's just say there was 100 people in the room, and it was just spitballing what was going to happen. But basically, everybody there stood behind Richard, told him, "We got this. Go do what you got to do. We'll make certain the cars get to the track." And it was just a complete group effort. Everybody's put their head down and said, "We know what we need to do right here, what would be expected of us to do." Yeah. But the atmosphere of it was extremely just serious, quiet, no joking around like we normally would be at the shop. Everybody cutting up, practical jokes. There was none of that. It was just a very serious situation that was hard to get prepared for, especially when the cars had to go back into the paint shop, change the colors to white. It was just a huge transition for everybody, and not just that, an emotional moment for everybody, whether it was Richard, Chocolate, Will Lind, all the guys that had been there forever. I mean, he was a friend, father, brother, whatever.
Yeah.
And so getting everybody through that was tough.
You had worked with Mike Dillon, and of course he was a member of the family and everything. And if you worked with Mike Dillon and you were working for RCR, I would assume that you knew Austin Dillon way back when.
Oh, yeah.
From the very beginning. What is your best Austin Dillon story as a youngin', as a kid?
Well, I mean, he was always in the shop running around. You could always tell if it was Austin or Ty in the shop, because Ty was more laid back, he was just there. And he was just hanging out.
Yeah.
Austin was like Mike, bouncing off the walls. I mean, just back and forth, aggravating people, practical jokes. Might have some kind of little cars going on, RC cars. You don't know what might be going on from one minute to the next. Motorcycles. Whatever the latest gadget was, Mike had it and had it for him, and they would be out there riding them, and they'd get to ride them when Mike wasn't taking it from them. So there was just a lot of stuff like that growing up, and then as they got going into legend racing and late model racing and dirt racing and everything they were doing, we didn't get to see them as much, even though they were on the same complex in a different building a lot of times. And sometimes when the McDowells would have their cars going, they would come into the shop. But later on, they moved into a shop-owned complex, so we got to see them more then. Yeah. But just getting to watch the success that they had and knowing that all the effort that was put into that was pretty fun to watch too.
Now, with the boss's grandson running around bouncing off the walls, did you have a way of woeing him down?
Nah, not really. There was no good way to woe him down. That's like saying, was there a good way to woe Mike Dillon down? And there was not. I mean, that was just a personality that you couldn't tame, and you still can't to this day, I'm sure. He may be a little bit calmer, but inside it's still that same rubber ball trying to unwind.